Okay.
Are we ready?
Yes, we're ready to go.
Okay. Hi, my name is Damaris Tevak, and I'm a member of the Sustainable Resource Committee. And I'd like to welcome everyone to our talk for this month, Native Plants of the Snoqualmie Valley. We've got two guest co-hosts today. And so first, I would like to show a little bit about the program tonight, the plan for what we'll do. I'll do an introduction to our committee and introductions to our guest speakers. Then we'll have the presentation about the native plants of the Snoqualmie Valley. We will have question and answers session at the end, and we ask that you type your questions into the chat feature, and we will read the questions and ask them. And then when the Q&A is done, we're gonna offer a little social time if you'd like to stay and chat with each other. So I'd like to introduce the Sustainable Resource Committee and welcome you on their behalf. Today's talk is hosted by the Sustainable Resource Committee, which is dedicated to promoting sustainable community environments within the greater Snoqualmie Valley that seek to lean forward into the future and not only survive, but thrive. We are committed to relationship building among people and groups, as well as among people and nature. The work of this committee primarily involves supporting and connecting with farmers, educators in both academic and indigenous cultures, and other like-minded individuals. This free informational talk is a part of a series of activities towards our goal of building a sustainable community in the Snoqualmie Valley. And before we get too much further, I'd just like to let everybody know that we're recording our meeting today, and I will post the recorded video on YouTube for people that weren't able to see it. I believe that we're going to have it set up so that only the speaker's video will be recorded as part of the recording. If you don't want to have your name or your video on the screen, you can edit your name and turn off your video if you wish. But we will stop the recording after the Q&A session is done. Let's see. I can't remember what my next slide is. Hold on. Okay, so I'd like to introduce both of our speakers. First, Bridget McNassar, she is the Native Plant Manager at Oxbow Farm and Conservation Center, will give her presentation about native plants. And after Bridget is done, Alex Harwell is the Outreach Program Manager for the Snoqualmie Indian Tribe. She will give her presentation next. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and Bridget will give her presentation now.
Unmute myself. Okay. Thanks, Damaris. I wanted to go ahead and just start off by acknowledging that we are all here on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights to this land, and specifically the Snoqualmie Indian Tribe. And we also want to thank the caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. So let's see. I'm having a hard time getting my slide to go to the next. Damaris, do you have any tips on advancing my slide?
Try clicking on it.
Just click on the slide?
Yeah.
Not working.
No. Try right.
Oh, there we go. I did it. it worked. So the first, I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, and I'm going to start out and do just a brief overview of Oxbow and what I do there. I'm going to talk briefly about why native plants matter, why they're important to us. And then I'm going to give some tips about some native plants that you might want to use in your garden. And I'll kind of specifically frame that by focusing on plants that are good for pollinators, since some of us attended a talk last month where Damaris talked about native pollinators. And then I'll kind of finish up by giving you some tips about good places to get plants and good sources for native plants. And then Alex is gonna go from there and talk a little bit about the Snoqualmie tribe and their relationship with native plants, some of their current work, and share some stories about some of the culturally significant plants that we have here in the valley. Okay. So for those that aren't familiar, Oxbow is a nonprofit organization. We're sort of located between Carnation and Duval, and about half of the land is down in the floodplain that this picture is showing, and then we have a little bit of forest up above us. And our mission is to inspire people to eat healthy, sustainably grown food and steward our natural resources for future generations. And we do that work through several different program areas. So we have an organic farm, we have a kids education program, we have our native plant nursery where I work, and we have a conservation and restoration program that does work on the Oxbow property and throughout the Snoqualmie Valley. And so we sort of do that work on the property, but we also aim to involve other folks through events, educational opportunities. We have a CSA program, and through opportunities of people to do internships and mentoring there. Our nursery grows Western Washington native plants for restoration, for landscaping, and to retail sellers. And then we also are working on doing a lot of outreach and education and advocacy work around getting people comfortable and interested in using native plants. So I wanted to start by just kind of sharing a definition of what is a native plant. Sometimes I get really excited and start talking, and I realize that sometimes the people I'm talking to, we're not all in agreement about what a native plant is. And there's different ways to define this, but I'm going to use the definition that is a native plant is a plant that existed in our region prior to European colonization of the area. And so let's talk a little bit about why native plants matter. One of the first kind of most essential things is native plants they support all other living things. They're the base of our food chain here. So they are these magical things that can take the energy from the sun and change it into something that other living beings and thrive on. There's a lot of specialists, so there's a lot of really special relationships between animals that live in this region and native plants in which they rely really specifically on them. There's a lot of neat research going on. A book I was reading recently talked about a study over actually on the East Coast where they looked at chickadees, and they compared in all these different suburban neighborhoods where people had different percentages of native plants in their yards, and they found that neighborhoods where there was 70% or more native trees and shrubs were the neighborhoods where chickadees were able to actually thrive and sustain their population, and their numbers weren't dropping, but they were actually maintaining their population. There's a lot of insects, a lot of native insects that eat plants, and a lot of those, a high percentage of those rely specifically on either a certain species of native plant or a certain group of native plants, both for eating and to lay eggs on to rear their young. So there's a lot of really special relationships where certain animals need a certain native plant to thrive. There's a lot of other we call them ecosystem services, things that native plants do to help us. They filter water, they reduce erosion. On the farm at Oxbow, we have these borders called buffers around the river that sort of protect our farm fields from some of the effects of flooding. Native plants can improve soil health. They support a lot of other beneficial insects, so things that help us on our farm and in our nursery that might eat pests, pest insects, or support raptors in the area. We love to have raptors because they eat mice and rats, and the raptors enjoy hanging out in like our big cottonwoods and our big maples around the farm. Thinking more, maybe a little bit more locally to your backyard or your garden or your close environments, planting native plants are helpful for gardeners because they evolved here. They are adapted to our soils. They're adapted to the climate of our region, our weather patterns. Once they get established, many times they don't require as much fertilizer, or if any fertilizer, or as much water. They're just used to the conditions that we have here. As long as you're putting them in, I wouldn't put a plant that likes to be in a shady forest out in the bright sun, but as long as you're kind of putting them in a place where they have what they need. Native plants are beautiful and diverse. There's tons of like kind of hoity-toity fancy horticulturalists like over in Europe, like in the gardens of Britain, that use North American native plants to make their very formal, beautiful gardens. They also provide us with a sense of place and strong connection to this region. So, here we are in the Pacific Northwest. We want to feel like we're here in the Pacific Northwest and be surrounded by the plants that belong here. Most of what I've said so far kind of is very human-centric and talks specifically about what native plants do for us and important humans. And something that I've been working on remembering is that humans aren't necessarily the center. Humans are one species in this whole vast world full of species. And so I think the most important reason why native plants matter is they are other beings in this world, and they have the right to exist. They belong here. They've lived here for thousands of years, and we have a responsibility to help them thrive. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of these beautiful plants that you might want to have in your garden. And like I said, I wanted to sort of frame this in thinking about having a pollinator garden at your house or at your school or at, on your porch. In a community garden that you work in. There's lots of different ways to do this, but it's kind of fun to think about them in terms of supporting pollinators. Pollinators have co-evolved with native plants, our native pollinators, and in fact, these plants can be up to 4 times as attractive to pollinators. They can recognize them and to their resources, their nectar and pollen, much easier than an unrecognizable plant maybe that we've brought in from Asia or Europe. Another important thing to think about in using these plants to support pollinators is it's kind of a reciprocal thing. Somewhere around 85 to 90% of all plants, all flowering plants, need pollinators. And so if we want, sometimes, again, we think of pollinators very human-centric. We talk about, like, we need them to pollinate our crops, which we do, but everything, like forests, meadows, prairies, all of the ecosystems that we love need pollinators. And so the more that we can provide more space for pollinators to exist, the more they'll support the plants, and then the plants will support the pollinators, and that's a beautiful cycle. And then one of the things I just like about a lot of these plants that I'm going to share with you is they provide us with a lot of fun ways to kind of personally connect with them when you have them in your yard. So you you get to see all of the pollinators that visit, and it's a really fun way to start learning some of the different pollinators that we have here, to have those plants close by and you can kind of watch them. Some of the plants have edible parts to them or medicinal parts, and that's a fun way to start connecting with the plants when you start working with them in that way. And then just being able to have a plant close by at your house and see what it looks like when it's a baby, see what it looks like in the spring, the summer, and the fall, and what it does in the winter are fun ways to really kind of have a deeper connection to plants. So my number one most important tip, I think, is just to think about diversity. So diversity meaning as many different plants as you can, and I'm going to put a couple different filters on that. So the first thing to think about when you're putting native plants in your garden is to think about a diversity of bloom times. So plants that bloom early in the spring, you know, later in the spring, through the summer, and on into the fall. And in that way, you're providing resources for animals and other living beings for as long of a period as possible, for things that use resources from flowers like nectar and pollen. So I put up some of my favorite early season native plants up here. There's tons more than this, but these are just some suggestions. And I'm trying to suggest things too that are maybe things that you are more easy to find at a nursery, or to, you know, kind of get your hands on to get you started. So starting over on the left, camas is a plant that's a really early blooming, beautiful purple flower. Alex is going to talk a little bit more about the cultural significance of that plant as well. Lupine, we have several native lupines to the area, and so there's a few different, you know, some are rather large, some are like just tiny little kind of ground cover annuals. So there's several different lupines. That's a really fun one to have early in the spring. Red flowering currant is a shrub. So if you've got enough space for a shrub to fill in, that's a really nice, very early flowering. Hummingbirds really love that one. And then you get some berries on that later in the season that you might want to eat, or you might want to share with the birds also. Oregon, the two over on the right, Oregon grape and waterleaf, are both shady plants, so they would be better in a shady area, but both of those are really beloved by pollinators, really nice, beautiful early bloomers. And then down there at the bottom is nodding onion, which is, I always call nodding onion the gateway native plant, because I just think it's like I always suggest this to people. It's a really cute, kind of tiny, it stays small in size, and so you could have it on your porch, you could have it on your front stoop. I have them just like peppered all throughout my garden at home amongst all my other vegetables. They are a really great pollinator plant. They're very cute. You can eat them. You can eat the flowers. You can eat the bulbs. That's a really fun one. I like nodding onion a lot. As we this is all, not really strict timeline, but all sort of nebulous. But as you sort of move into the summer, you'll see some of these guys blooming. Checker mallow is one. It looks a little bit like hollyhock because it's closely related to it. They have these really neat pink or purple spikes of flowers. Really, really prolific bloomer, and really easy to take care of. At the bottom is a native shrub called ninebark. So again, needs a little bit more space, but it has these really pretty like poofs of flowers that attract pollinators. The one in the middle, Fleabane, is a native plant that it's another kind of nicer, compact, little shorter, not super aggressive native plant, really beautiful flowering. The Oregon sunshine woolly sunflower, another name for it, which is in Damaris's background. It's so beautiful. It's got that really nice silvery foliage and just really bright orange yellow flowers. And one of the things I really like about that is it spreads. So if you want something to kind of aggressively spread out, this one will do that. But you can also like pretty easily like chop it back, and it will recover really easily from that. A lot of people don't know that we have several species of sedums that are native to Washington. And so those are another fun one that if you only have a small amount of space, you could have sedums there. They are prolific flowers, and we see just tons and tons in the nursery when they're flowering. We see tons of bees hanging out on them. Later in this season, some flowers that will take you into the fall. We have a lot of native asters. This picture shows Douglas aster, which is a neat one that's purple with the yellow center. Yarrow is one that it's for us is blooming now at Oxbow, and then it'll kind of keep producing more flowers throughout into the fall. And that's a fun one because it's that nice sort of flat head that has tons of tiny little flowers. And so a lot of the little pollinators will be hanging out on that one and be able to use those flowers because they can get to the resources in them. Ocean spray is another shrub it's blooming right now, and it'll into the fall a little bit, and just really beautiful plumes of bright kind of almost fuzzy looking flowers because they're so tiny. Goldenrod is a really neat fall bloomer that produces a lot of tiny little flowers also. And then all the way over on the right is gumweed, which is a really sweet member of the aster families or sunflower family, and prolific bloomer. It's one it's kind of funny. A lot of times where you see it in the wild, it's kind of in these really like dry, rocky places, and it's like really tiny. But when you have it in a garden, it's just like woohoo, kind of gets spoiled, and you get like really much larger plants in a garden and with lots more blooms on them. So we're kind of looking at different bloom times. So looking at adding native plants with different bloom times. So you have things blooming throughout the season for pollinators. Another thing to think about is different flower structures. Pollinators have different ways of getting to nectar or attaching pollen to their body, and so they might be because they're smaller or larger. It might be because they have longer or shorter tongues, and so all of these different shapes of flowers will attract different types and be able to provide resources for different types of pollinators, as well as add a lot of interest to your garden. One of the things too we talked about earlier is some of these plants attract beneficial insects, so insects that will eat pest insects. There's a lot of little like parasitic wasps that will kill aphids if you have them in the yard, and they're tiny, and so they like things like this ocean spray or this sea blush that have lots of tiny little flowers that will provide resources for them, and then if there's aphids around, they'll go attack them. So looking for a variety of flower shapes and structures will help provide resources for different types of insects and animals. And then another thing to think about if you have room is kind of including some of these different plant types. So having things like woody shrubs and trees, not only, when they're blooming, provide things for pollinators, they might provide fruits for birds and other animals. They might provide nesting space or space for small mammals to hang out in. Grasses, same thing. Grasses are wind pollinated, so they don't really need a pollinator, but they can provide forage for other animals. They can provide seeds for birds in the winter time. And sometimes some things can use the little sort of clump bases of them to nest in. So one of the things I think that is sometimes, and maybe you've experienced this, can be frustrating to people is where do I get native plants? We always sort of like laugh. Sometimes you go to a nursery and there's like the same 10 native plants at every nursery, and they're kind of like in a corner looking kind of sad. And so you might wonder, like we read a lot about, and hear a lot about using native plants, but sometimes they can be hard to get your hands on. And so when at Oxbow, we are not a retail nursery, so you can't like come in and shop at Oxbow, but we do sell plants to other nurseries. And when I go buy native plants, one of my favorite places to go is local native plant nurseries. Because the folks that run them really are experts. They're very passionate, and there's a lot of nurseries around in our area where people have been doing this for many years. Sometimes the nurseries have like display gardens set up, which are really nice, and then you can kind of see what plants look like when they're larger. You can see how different plants look like together in a group. They can answer all of your questions. And another thing is most native plant nurseries really pretty strongly use ecologically sound practices to grow their plants. So you can feel really good about buying there. So that's, like most nurseries will be open year round. Even now during the COVID-19, most people are either letting you order ahead and come pick them up, and so that they're still thriving during this time and available to buy from. A couple other options require you to plan ahead a little bit, but are really worth it. So our conservation districts in the state, if you're here in the Snoqualmie Valley area, we're in the King Conservation District, but they're throughout the whole state, there's other districts. They have these really great native plant sales in late winter. So it's usually sometime in February or March. And they buy in a large quantity of trees and shrubs, and then also herbaceous plants, and then put them up for sale so the general public can come and buy native plants. And they usually, like on their website, they'll put the list out like in November or December. And you can order ahead, like you can order online and then just go pick them up. Or if you want to go to the sale and kind of browse, you can do that as well. But they have a really wide selection, and they're provide a lot of additional resources to just kind of teach people about native plants and using native plants. So that's a great resource. Another great resource is our state Native Plant Society. Our state is broken up into chapters. Where we are here in the Snoqualmie Valley, we're in the Central Puget Sound chapter, and each of these chapters around the state will have spring plant sales, and some of them also have fall plant sales. Our local chapter started doing in the fall, they also sell like bulbs and seeds. So that's another way to get native plant seeds, which is another thing that it might be difficult to purchase somewhere. So those are some great resources for getting plants. I just wanted to throw in a little, if you want to think, if you want a tip of a way that you could do some advocacy around native plants when you're shopping. If you're at another retail nursery, a lot of places may or may not have a native plant section or prominently displayed. This picture is a cute little section at Sky Nursery in Shoreline. And so I would just suggest asking, like just always ask, like even if that's not what you're there for, just ask. They will stock things that people are interested in buying, and they want to know what you're interested in buying. So just ask if they have native plants if you don't see them. And then another, I think, important thing that we can do is ask whenever you're purchasing plants, whether it's native plants or other, ask whether the plants that you're purchasing have been treated with pesticides. It's super important that if we're putting these plants out on the landscape to support other living things, we don't want them to be dangerous to other living things. So more and more people are becoming aware of this, and more nurseries are choosing not to stock plants that have been treated with neonicotinoids and other pesticides. So you should always ask when you're out and about shopping. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk about Another option is collecting seeds and growing your own native plants. So this is, something that sometimes is your only option for certain species if you don't see them being sold other places. You might be able to either purchase seeds or collect seeds from a friend's plants or plants from the wild. Many plants really produce prolific amounts of seed, and if you take a small amount of it to take home and plant, you're not doing any great harm to the plant. So the picture in the middle there shows some of our camas bulbs, and they just sort of like the little brown cups just kind of open at this time of year, and there's little black seeds in there, and you can just pour the seeds out and save them and plant them. With a caveat, I will tell you there's a range of difficulties. Some native plants are really easy to grow from seed and some are more difficult. But I mean, the good news is there's plenty of those that are in the easy range to get started with and try. And it's really fun. And I guarantee if you grow a plant from seed, you're just going to be that much more in love with it. It's really fun. So with that, I'm just going to finish up with a couple final thoughts. Just thinking about, sometimes people get, I don't know, a lot of times I talk to people and they get kind of stressed out, I gotta have all native plants, or everything has to be, just everything has to be native, and I don't know how to do this. I just suggest kind of starting slow. Start with things that you like, maybe either something that just really speaks to you based on its beauty, or maybe something that you want to eat, and start there with your kind of connection with the plants. I also just want to mention that this works at many scales. So you do not have to have a huge 5-acre property to plant native plants. You could do it in a small container on your porch. You could, intersperse some with your vegetables in your raised bed. You can bring them to your community garden. So there's a lot of options for working with them. And I would say just get started. A lot of the plants are perennials that you would probably end up working with. The bottom two pictures show some lupine at one of our pollinator gardens at Oxbow, and the picture on the left is one year we planted and it looked like that, and the next year, the picture on the right, I feel like it got 5 times bigger in 1 year. So you may start out with something small, and it gets big pretty fast. So thank you for listening, and we'll have some time at the end to share some resources, and when you if you replay the video, you can look up some of the sources that might help answer some of your questions as well. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Alex. Let's see.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bridget. Let's share my screen here. Okay, great. So to start, I'd just like to say a big thank you, Bridget, for opening up. That was really great information. Thanks so much. Beautiful pictures. If y'all haven't been to Oxbow, try and go next year when they're reopened to the public. It's a beautiful space. They're doing a lot of good work. Also want to say a big thank you to the Sustainable Resource Committee for hosting and bringing the community together in this virtual space. So I'm Alex Harwell. I work for the Snoqualmie Indian Tribe in the Environmental and Natural Resource Department. I've now been with the tribe for 4 years, and I'm the Outreach Program Manager for the ENR department. I'm managing 2 screens, so just work with me here. Okay, so the Snoqualmie tribe, the Snoqualmie people, Snoqualmie, have lived in the South Salish Sea region since time immemorial, for as long as the earth and waters remember. The tribe has been here and will continue to be here, stewarding the land for as long as people exist on this land. Within this, plants and people have this deep relationship for mutual survival that the Snoqualmie tribe has cultivated by these teachings passed down from ancestors. Rather than forcing the land to become something it's not, the Snoqualmie tribe lives with the land, practicing reciprocity. Snoqualmie tribe's made with the land, not separate from it. This thought comes from the teaching of always thinking of those who came before you and those still to come after you. We are who we are today because of those teachers who came before us, and we are shaping the future for generations still to come. This map on the left shows the ceded territory from the Treaty of 1855. Of course, Snoqualmie people, they traveled much further than this, but we like to have lines on maps. This is the designated traditional territory of the Snoqualmie tribe from the treaty. So that northern border is the border of US and Canada, because of course we can't go further than the US north. South to the Nisqually, west to the Sound, and then east to the crest of the Cascades. And so, like I said, I work, I work in the Environmental and Natural Resource Department, and the mission of the ENR department is to protect, preserve, and enhance the natural and cultural resources of the Snoqualmie Reservation and traditional tribal lands for the benefit of current and future generations. This background here is of Mount Si, and then the confluence of the Three Forks of the Snoqualmie. So ENR, it was created in 2008, a direct result of re-recognition, which last year we celebrated the 10th year anniversary of Snoqualmie tribe re-recognition. And so just to briefly say, our department includes a solid waste and recycling program, water quality program, a GIS program, an environmental compliance program, education and outreach program, and a restoration and monitoring program. So we do a lot of different things and work with a lot of different groups with just our 10-person staff, which is pretty awesome. So I'm going to talk about a little bit the native plants in the region that have been here for thousands of years, that have evolved with both the landscape, but also the people that have cultivated the relationship with many of these plants. So the Snoqualmie people have developed a deep understanding of plant technology through the practice of traditional ecological knowledge and passing it down through the generations. Some of these uses of plants include the use of plants for food, fiber, which also includes like building materials, so wood, paddles, canoes, houses, and then medicine. Many of these plants, like Bridget was saying, we can find in native plant nurseries, but we can also easily get from our local areas with very little effect on established populations as long as we use sustainable harvesting practices. Bridget went into it a little bit, but plant propagation is a whole nother webinar series. So, if you want to dive into that, like Bridget mentioned, we have a lot of resources that we'll show at the end of the slide, but maybe we could have a webinar series about that too. We'll see. Or email us, if you're curious about anything in particular. So the plants I'm going to talk about are Camas, Wapato, Devil's Club, Willow, Pacific Yew, and Yarrow. So Camas, Sabid, I'm going to use the Lashutseed word for these plants as well. Bear with me on my pronunciation, and if there's any Lashutseed speakers in the audience, have mercy on me. But it's important to hear these names, the first names for these plants, and I really wanted to use this as honestly an opportunity to practice those words too. And then also just seeing that language and becoming more familiar with it is really important, just to recognize the deep history. So Camas, here's a picture of Jenkins Creek Prairie, which is in Covington. We harvested seeds from there, and this poster was actually used as a visual aid at an elders retreat. So we were handing out Camas seed packets to the elders. But I wanted to just deep dive into kind of a short deep dive of the history of Camas in the Snoqualmie Valley. Covington's really close, but it's not quite Snoqualmie Valley, but we used to have very extensive Camas prairies above and below the falls. The largest one was above the falls. Snoqualmie Prairie. And I'm going to read this quote by tribal elder Mary Ann Hinsman, which is talking about Meadowbrook. Meadowbrook Farm is probably a place we're all familiar with it, but this is Meadowbrook. This is a sacred place. This belonged to the Moses family, Chief Sanawa. They were promised this property and they still have not received it, but it used to be used for potato fields and hops, like they grow in Eastern Washington. It was a good camp place for all the people. It was special. But when the white settlers came in, they burned up the natives here for the land because they had never seen potato fields like the wild potatoes here. They pushed them out. So this is referencing both the farming legacy of Snoqualmie Prairie, which, you know, when settlers came in, they're like, oh great, it's so open, we can plant potatoes, we can plant hops here. But then she also referenced the wild potatoes, the camas, that used to grow here and was cultivated here for thousands of years. So just that deep, we often don't think of prairie for Snoqualmie Valley, we think of deep forest, we think of tall trees, but these prairies were maintained by people. You know, originally they were glaciers retreating, but then people saw the value of the food and medicine that they produce, and so they were maintained by people. They don't exist in a healthy way without people. Here is 2 examples of how you can plant camas. And if you have a small space, it's a really great landscaping bowl. And then on the right is a small propagation bed that we have at our nursery, modeled, inspired by Grand Ronde tribe that's cultivating camas in beds. And they're getting camas bulbs to be fist size because they're using more conventional farming practices, but mixing them with traditional knowledge farming practices, seaweed as fertilizer, etc. And they're just getting really good food for their people. And then on the left too, everyone loves camas and bloom. Bees, children, adults. Okay, Wapato, Squalts, Indian potato. This is another visual that we use for Elders Retreat because we were cooking the Wapato and serving it to the elders. And I'll show that in the next slide. But here we have, Wapato used to exist everywhere, and now we really don't see it, well, everywhere in ponds and some rivers and streams, but now we don't see it at all. It's very rare, and plant nerds get excited when they see it. Same with camas. But it used to be abundant. Here's a picture of a remnant Wapato stand. You can see, show right here, where it's extensive. It gets super tall, 5 feet tall, and it's beautiful when it's in flower. Under that photo here we are harvesting Wapato, which is so fun. And then when you harvest the Wapato, sometimes they float up to the top and they're really easy to collect. And then this is also an example of Wapato. It survives best with people. When you dig up the bulbs, it creates more space. Well, people and geese and other animals too, but really people, digging them up, floating them to the top, and then it kind of moves that way too. It creates more space for the older generation, and then the smaller bulbs that you're not going to eat, they can float and propagate themselves downstream or somewhere else where there's space. Here we have our stew that we made. So our Wapato stew, we just, it was the first time that we had the opportunity to cook it in a while. So we, on the advice of another tribal member, we peeled it and then we slow cooked it we tried to use all native ingredients. So knotting onion, which Bridget had that lovely picture in flower, delicious edible onion, lobster mushroom that we had harvested that same October in a secret area in Snoqualmie. And then we used smoked salmon that the tribal canoe family provided to add to the Wapato stew. It was really delicious. And then here's this quote too I wanted to share from tribal elder Elise Zacchaeus Erickson. I'm just speaking about the deep presence of Wapato. We ate a lot of soups or stews. There is an Indian potato that you gather from the bottom of the lakes. To me, they are similar to water chestnut. They are very, very good. You cook that like a stew with your fish or your clams. Sometimes we would go to Yakima or cross the mountain ridges for their food and whatever they wanted to trade. Sometimes we would take them smoked fish or smoked clams. And, further in Elise's quotes too, it used to be harvested very extensively in Lake Sammamish, and now due to water hydrology, we don't see it at all. Then I guess I would like to show too, here's some ways that we're propagating it in our nursery. We have it in dry capillary bed, which now is pretty dry, and it's managing to survive, but it really prefers to be in water year round. I don't know how these plants are surviving, but they are. They're thriving. Well, maybe not thriving, but they're survivors. And then here we just have a Rubbermaid bin that is like trash we weren't using, so I filled it with water. We had some bulbs that were donated to the tribe. I was like, great, we can throw them in this bucket and use eventually. I will say, unfortunately, we haven't had any success yet at our restoration sites due to herbivory and just trying to figure out kind of best practice to plant this plant. So we're hoping though to expand it. Like you'll need to have a pond in your yard and want to plant water, so let's try some methods to do that. So the next plant I want to talk about is Devil's Club, Tiltachiwiats, sorry about that, and it's in the ginseng family, so high medicinal value. Here we have planted in our native plant landscaping. As you can see, it gets quite tall. That left-hand picture, that's been there for about 6 to 7 years. Originally, it was very small. Then on the right side, we have it cultivating in pots in our nursery so that we can put it out when we have a good location for it. The cool thing about the Devil's Club is it can be done by seed, but it can also be as stakes, which is a really nice and easy way to do it. I have the next slide here is using its stakes on the left as the restoration site. It's very hard to see, but in this upper left corner is where we planted it, right next to the river, and it was just a stick. I know you probably can't see it, but this picture on the right is this season here, where and we literally just took a cutting of it, stuck it in the ground, and here it's growing. So pretty awesome. If you have seed, you want to keep the diversity with seed, but sometimes you don't have the time or the energy or the space, and you just want to produce more of that plant. This is at the casino on the reservation, so we want to have lots of patches of Devil's Club to harvest from. Willow, Satsapats. Willow, there's lots of different species in Washington. We use 3 in our restoration site. It's a great habitat plant. Lots of animals love it. Bees love it. Early season, beavers love it. And it's great because it grows super fast. So it's really nice to use in our restoration and in restoration in general. You can just plug and go. And I'm embarrassed to say that I don't have any pictures of willow. This is the one plant that I had no of our own photos, and it's probably the thing that we use most in restoration. So I made an event for next year that I'm going to take some pictures of that. Okay, Pacific Yew, Satsabirats. This is very slow growing evergreen tree. You can start this by both cuttings or seed. It's very slow growing, so be patient either way. But it's a great wood to use in carvings or paddles. It's strong and lightweight, so it's really great for paddles. Unfortunately, we just don't see it anymore. It was harvested almost to extinction. For the medicinal use, the bark is used, initially it was used to develop Taxol, which is a cancer medicine. Now that's synthesized, luckily, so you don't see it harvested so readily, but super slow growing. So, it's slowly coming back, but at a tribal elder's request, we try to plant at least one at all of our restoration sites. Sometimes it's hard to find good environment for it. It needs shade, it needs moist conditions. So this is a great one to plant if you have deep shade and you have a lot of water. Here on the right-hand side, it's also a great plant that brings people together. So this is our Zacchaeus Creek restoration site, and this was the ribbon cutting for the site, and we chose a yew plant for these I don't know the right word, people that were really involved. It's the Dow Constantine, chair or council member de Los Angeles, the old mayor of Sammamish, and then Wally Pereira, the landowner. So these key figures in making this restoration site happen. And you know, together they planted the yew tree to symbolize that partnership. And then finally, Yarrow. Oh, sorry about that typo. So Sakai Sapats. And Yarrow is a really great plant. It grows so easily. It's pollinator friendly. It's medicinal. It really likes full sun. It does well in full sun, dry soil. So if you have those things, this is, and you can see the little bee. This is on a rainy day. The bumblebees sheltering in the Yarrow. This is just in our parking lot. It's a really great way to get pollinator plants in these really hot, narrow spaces that usually people just mulch. But it does well. We didn't even plant it. We spread some seed, and it's almost weed. It's definitely weedy, but at least it's a medicine, so we can pull it up and use it. Here's some other ways that we're incorporating these native plants into the landscape. So at the admin building of the Snoqualmie Tribe, we are doing all native plants with focusing on these culturally significant plants. Here's a rain garden that went in this last fall. These plants we got from Oxbow, and they're all beautiful and lovely. And we even managed to fit in a Devil's Club in this back corner. You can see that bottom left. It's a little tiny Devil's Club that's doing really well still through our dry summer. Got enough water, luckily, this winter. Here's another planting on the side of the Tribal Activities Building, this really small strip, which was inspired by a cultural employee, tribal member Suzanne Dominic, and you know, one day I went and she was hand removing this soil that was just full of weeds, and you know, we inspired and working with the culture department, we replanted all native plants that to be used and harvested in the programs. And then finally, our current project that we just started this last year is the community garden. This is an aerial photo where we're incorporating both medicines, traditional foods, and also just healthy foods. So, you know, the idea is to just like so people can recognize these plants, go out and harvest it, and also learn how to grow them at home as part of kind of the reciprocity of restoration. We harvest these plants, we want to make sure that they're available and that they continue to be available for future generations. Here is the first page of resources. I'm just going to leave it here for a second so that in the recording, you know, you can go back and look at it a little bit longer and pause it there. Here's a second resource list for propagating plants from seed. Here's another list of resources. And then, yes, I want to open it up to questions. I'll let Damaris take it from here, but please email Bridget or I if you have any questions, and we'll try and answer, or we'll redirect you to someone who can answer better.
Thank you, Bridget and Alex. I don't see any questions typed up in chat yet, but everyone feel free to type your questions. Before we began, someone asked if the past video about native bees is available. I will go find the YouTube link and I'll put it in the chat so that everybody else can watch it. Okay, so the first question from Andrew is, what are some of the medicinal uses for yarrow? Do either of you know?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about this, but I encourage you to, there's a great book, Medicinal Northwest. It's a great book. Or sorry, it's more, and it has usually 2-page sections on each plant, but yarrow is really good to eat, make tea and soup in it. Really good for sore muscle. Internally, it can reduce induced fever, it down. But you know, be careful with medicine, know what you're doing, or talk to someone that does, and then go from there. Lots of uses though. Do you have anything to add, Bridget? Is it a dye, Bridget?
I think you can use it as a dye, and it's a little. I haven't personally done it, but it makes sort of like a pale yellow dye from what I've seen.
Okay, another question is about if your property is at 1,400 feet elevation, are there any special requirements for the elevation?
I'll go ahead and start, and please jump in, anyone else. But I mean, I think no matter, you know, regardless of whatever your elevation is, just kind of looking in other places. So maybe if like you're on a hike or you're visiting, you know, or you have natural area around you, I think just like trying to see what other plants naturally exist at that elevation, and maybe not trying to force, you know, something from too high above you elevation wise or too low below you elevation wise. And I mean, that goes for wherever you live. I think to just you know, try to at least start with things that you know kind of exist within that naturally elevation that you are at. I don't know if that's helpful.
I think that makes sense. That's a nice, easy rule.
Yeah.
So Richard Green is asking, do we know of an area in Snoqualmie Valley that's been successful at propagating Wapato?
Well, we propagated it in our nursery, and Bridget has propagated it as well. But as far as like using it in restoration and seeing it be successful, we haven't, I mean, this was our first year. We planted it last fall, I believe, in one of our restoration sites. So, you know, we're just barely trying to figure it out. I hope that was your question.
Yeah, we've been, I mean, we have seen Wapato in several places in the Snoqualmie Valley, and the places that I personally have seen it, I've only seen it as a population of only male plants or a population of only female plants. And so none of the places where I've seen it in the Snoqualmie Valley is producing seed. And so each plant produces tubers each year, which then, as Alex mentioned, can break off and start a new plant somewhere else. And we also, so we have bought seed from another area that was more down in the Columbia Gorge area, and have grown it from seed. We haven't planted any out yet. So yeah, to be determined how best to do that.
Makes me wonder if I could grow Wapato in my pond feature in my yard. Yeah.
Oh yes. Yes. We have sorry, I'll just jump in and Alex, you can mention too, but we have a bunch of it at my house and we have them in like half barrels that are cut in half and they're just like in compost or sawdust and water and they're super happy. So yeah, it's a fun one to try at home, I think.
I don't really want to take over the questions about Wapato, but does it need soil because my pond feature doesn't really have soil, so I don't know if I could grow it in just water. But
You grow it in a pot and then sit that pot in rain.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have some ponds kind of behind me and I was doing that just as holdover beds and it did great. It was full shade, so long term it didn't do great, but it did do great just in the meantime.
Oh yeah.
Doesn't it fun?
Okay, so the next question is, Sebekwa is asking, did I hear correctly that some plants are bipollinators? I'm not really sure what that means, if it's about plants being male or female.
I don't know either. I don't I mean I might have mistakenly said something. I don't know.
Sebek was saying that she might have misheard something.
Okay.
So the next question, can you suggest some early spring bloomers that mason bees would love? I could actually help answer this question because I raised mason bees. For native plants, huckleberries, they tend to bloom almost on time no matter what's going on with the weather. Salmonberry is an early bloomer that mason bees love. Queen bumblebees and hummingbirds also love salmonberry. This is not a native plant, but it's really easy to find a winter blooming heather or heath. Those also have blooms before anything else, and I've seen all kinds of bees visit that plant while you're waiting for your other plants to bloom. Trying to remember what else is strawberries and blueberries. Plant other foods that are also early blooming. So the next question is if we have any advice for dealing with invasive species.
That's a separate webinar. But if you're dealing with specific species, feel free to email us and I can direct you to our restoration department or send over any resources that I have. But just looking at your county website, there's some really good information and then also a lot of free programs for homeowners to combat invasive species. So lots of resources, like I said, kind of too much information to dive into, but please email us if we can send that information your way.
Okay, there's a couple more questions about if there are any nurseries that are selling Wapato, and also are there different species of Wapato?
I can answer that. The Fourth Corner Nurseries, which is in Bellingham, sells Wapato. If you look on their website, they usually have specific times of year that they ship plants, but they ship them in the mail. And so usually, maybe for Wapato, it might be in the fall or over the winter, they would ship that to you. There is another nursery I know of that sells Wapato down in Longview, I think. It's called Watershed Garden Works. They're specifically maybe more selling towards folks doing restoration. And there are different species of Wapato. It exists, and chime in, Alex, if you have more information. It exists like over almost the entire North America, and I know for sure there's at least one other species, but I think there's more than one other species.
Yeah, so it's all over North America. It's also in Asia and other places around the globe too. Right. And sometimes you find it there. So it's kind of a cool plant that you find in a lot of different cultures, which is awesome. But as far as it being the same species, different, variation, variety, or whatever, I don't know. But Bridget would know more about that. But you do see it in a lot of places.
The next question is, how does one achieve wholesale purchase status at Oxbow?
You're muted.
Thank you. Technically, Wholesale is like a government agency, a business, another nursery, nonprofit organization is who we sell to. I sometimes tell people, if you can act like a wholesale customer, I will sell you plants wholesale, which just means you email me, you tell me what plants you want. I get the plants ready for you. You come pick them up. We're not set up to do the service that a retail nursery would do, which is to like advise you on which plants to buy and talk about your backyard and stuff. So if you can, be real straightforward about what you need and what you're looking for, we have our plant availability is online on our website. Yeah, and I can direct you to that if you email me.
We also have extras at the Snoqualmie Nursery, so potentially the species, especially if it's something that we're just trying to have more of in the region, we might have some available too. So if you're just looking for like 1 or 2 or 1 or 3, you can always try and send an email.
It's really neat. Andrew's asking, are there native plant species that you recommend that are more resilient to changes to the Snoqualmie watershed resulting from climate change?
I'll start, and I'd be interested to hear what you say, Alex, as well as you guys do restoration planting and such. I think the thing that I tell most people when they ask this question is, I think, again, diversity is going to be our ally here. And so planting a lot of different species on the landscape, and maybe planting, some that are comfortable here now, some that maybe either might be the same species, but coming from genes, like maybe we get some yarrow seed from Northern California or Southern Oregon and grow plants and have them here. So either genetics that maybe come from a little bit more south, or maybe some species that come from a little bit more south. So if you're looking at prairie species, maybe adding in some species like from the Willamette Valley where there's prairies. I think that, again, a mix and kind of trying to add little things in. Nothing is going to, there's not going to be like a moment where it changes and now we're using Southern Oregon species. I think just kind of trying to have a mix of species and genetic diversity on the landscape. And then, as things change, we'll see kind of which plants are thriving and which are not. It's not a very satisfying answer, probably.
No, I think that was good. I mean, it's like we don't know. I think it's just what it is, and we're trying to do the best we can. But it's changing so fast, and plants take a long time to grow. So just everything that Bridget suggests, just different genetics from different places, and making sure that they're also, creating seed with our local genetics, and then moving forward into the future. So it's not we're not planting all from California, but we're planting those interspersed with our native stock, our native genetic stock, so we can move forward in a hopefully sustainable direction. Some things aren't going to be here though in 10, 20 years. So I don't know.
One thing I'd like to point out is that Henderson's checker mallow is endangered in Oregon, at least. And that is a plant that grows in riparian zones, right? So if you have on a wet spot, or I guess a rain garden, and if you're able to get Henderson's checker mallow, that's a great plant to add to your garden. It's really sad that there's plants that could be endangered, and it's because of a loss of habitat. So another question is, are there any other nurseries that you recommend that would carry these native plants?
Yes, thank you. I meant to say this earlier. Some of my favorites that are in the area, I should have made a slide for this also. I'll just list, Go Natives is a nursery in Shoreline. Tadpole Haven in Woodinville. Wildflowers Northwest in Maple Valley. Woodbrook in Gig Harbor. And I'm forgetting one of the ones that I wanted to say. Let's see if I wrote it down. And there's more than that, but those are some retail. Oh, I know. There's a really cute new nursery on Whidbey Island that's called Rainy Day Flora that is also retail and sells a lot of native plants. So check those out. A lot of those nurseries have, you know, maybe either hours only by appointment or limited. Maybe they're only open 2 days a week. So check out their websites before you just heading out there.
Also to plug the Native Plant Society, they usually have a annual plant sale. That's a really great resource as well. So, very good resource.
Okay, another question. Prior to European colonization, do we know the daily or seasonal diet of those native to Snoqualmie?
Yes, that's a very long, deep dive question as well. There's a lot of good resources and books out there if you are interested in looking at those resources. Send me an email. I'm happy to send those resources. The Burke Museum has done a ton of research just looking at archaeological sites and fire pits and things like that. So we know though that it was a super diverse diet. I can't remember, it was like they found a couple hundred of different plants when they went through these fire pits. You know, what do we eat now? 9 different things or something like that. So it's really cool, all the different plant knowledge that people here have and still use today.
Okay, we'll just do a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up the Q&A and then we can have some social time. So does anyone know where to get checker mallow?
Yeah, well, we grow checker mallow, and we are growing it for a couple. So we sell it to PCC markets. So some of the PCC stores next spring they'll have it, and then we're also selling it to the Snohomish Conservation District. So I was mentioning the Conservation District sales, so they'll have that. I bet most of those nurseries that I listed earlier also sell Henderson's checker mallow also.
Okay, the last question is if the Four Corners nursery is retail?
It is. I think they will. I mean, anybody can buy from them. They might have a minimum, so you might have to buy 10 of something, or they sell plants, something that's called bare root, and so they're plants that they're not in a container. They've been pulled up out of the ground, and so there's like not soil with them, just the roots. And so they only sell them at a certain time of year because of that. And I think they will sell them in like sets of like 10 or something. So you may have to maybe go in with a friend to make a purchase from them if you don't want that many, but you don't have to have a certain status to buy from them.
And they do ship too, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
You can go up to Bellingham, but they ship it to you too.
Okay. Richard's asking for both of your email addresses. If it's okay with you, I will share your email in the chat box.
It's also on that slide.
Okay. All right. And Kathleen is asking for us to repeat the nurseries. I wrote some of them down. Go Natives in Shoreline, Tadpole Haven,
Haven.
Tadpole
I was
Haven.
gonna say I could type them in the chat too. If you
Yeah.
want.
Okay.
And
All
then
right.
you can
that would
keep
be
going
good.
with. You can keep going with something else.
Okay. Well, I think we should stop recording and we'll open it up to just having some social time and get to know each other.